Well, I'm so glad we've got Dr. Zuby's sage advice. Freedom or lockdown, where the world is headed, unity and critical thinking with Zuby. This is from the Ellen Fisher podcast. She started one a few months ago, I believe, and you guys have been asking me to touch on a few of the episodes, including this one. I had some idea what it was going to be about, just going by the title, just going by the little bit I know about Ellen and how she feels about vaccines, and the little bit I know about Zuby and how he feels about vaccines. And wow, it did not disappoint.
So many people have suffered, whether they've lost a loved one due to the virus or suffered from the aftermath of the lockdowns due to depression and suicide.
I just wanted to stop real quick in this little intro she gives before the actual interview, because it doesn't look like suicide rates increased, at least here in the US. We've seen the opposite. I'm sure she just included that because, of course, right? A lot of people would expect suicide rates to go up during a pandemic, but we don't just go, oh, I think that's what would happen, and then make statements based on what we think would happen. No, that's why data is important. That's why the numbers are important. Interestingly, she has no interest in data or numbers.
And while we don't get into the data and the stats in this episode,
shocking. And she probably wouldn't bother looking into rates of suicide anyway, because what she currently believes supports her, freedom narrative. Lockdowns make people kill themselves. Anyway, once they get into the actual interview, it starts out mostly fine. They start talking about the dangers of tribalism and the importance of independent thinking, the importance of friendships and maintaining friendships even with people who we don't see eye to eye on.
In this situation now, people are losing friends over freaking vaccines.
Yes.
This person took a shot and this person won't take a shot. And it's honestly, right? You're putting political party, you're putting medicines from big pharma, you're putting that over your long-term relationships, over your own friends, your own flesh and blood. To me, that is totally insane.
Medicines from big pharma that can literally save your life. So I don't know, man. Maybe more important than friends. Context needed, right? If you are just cutting out anyone and everyone from your life who won't get vaccinated, not because they pose any risk to you, but I don't know, out of principle or just to punish them or something, yeah, you're probably a bad friend. But I don't think that's what's happening most of the time. It seems like most of the time you have someone who's I'm high risk, or I live with someone with a compromised immune system. I want to hang out with you, but you refuse to get vaccinated, and so I have to draw that line. We can't be around each other. That's not politics. That's making a tough decision to protect yourself and others. Do some people take it too far? Absolutely. I think a lot of people still don't realize what little risk there is to children themselves. A lot of people really don't realize what little risk there is being outside. I still see people walking around the block with masks on. Some people act as though they are in dire danger being around unvaccinated people, even though they themselves are young and healthy and fully vaccinated. There is a fair amount of fear-mongering on the pro-vaccine side from people who just do not understand statistics. Even still, I can absolutely imagine scenarios where cutting off people because they're not vaccinated makes sense, and it has nothing to do with tribalism or hating freedom or some shit. And look, for some unvaccinated people, it's not just being unvaccinated. They have adopted a lot of really awful, really hateful rhetoric from Fox News and elsewhere that just makes them terrible to be around. I don't look down on someone at all for refusing to be around people like that.
I'm a pro-individual rights person. I'm a pro-personal responsibility person. That doesn't magically change just because there's a virus going around, which, by the way, has a over 99% survival rate in the vast majority of the population.
That's undershooting it by quite a bit, but let's just say that 1%, let's say the virus killed 1% of the US population. That's 3 million people. Globally, that's 79 million people. Maybe that's still not enough to lock down a country or to mandate vaccines or whatever. I'm sure for Zuby, it's not, but I just think it's important to talk about the actual numbers because many people just don't know. They don't really understand how many people are on this planet and how many people get caught up in that 1%. And also, it's not just deaths. There are people with long COVID who are still suffering months after being hospitalized. It's still not clear how bad all of that is. There's a really interesting breakdown from Slate Star Codex. He tries to give some idea of how bad long COVID could be. I don't think it's something we should ignore.
All I advocate for is what everybody claimed to believe back in January 2020. That's all. All that's happened is I haven't changed my position, and a lot of other people have, and they've been swept into authoritarianism.
So basically, we all claimed to love freedom before the pandemic, and now the only real freedom lover left is Zuby. We all sold out to Pfizer, I guess. I don't know what he thinks freedom means in America. He's not American, so, benefit of the doubt. But it doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. It doesn't mean there aren't numerous restrictions on your freedom. We have laws, too many to count. That's infringing on your freedom. That's keeping you from doing things that potentially you want to do. We have those laws for the most part for the greater good, to protect others. A vaccine mandate or a vaccine passport, that's what I assume he would find most egregious or anti-American about this whole thing. That would be one of those things to protect others. If we had one, which we don't, just to be clear. We do have public school vaccines, though. We have for a very long time. It's one of the reasons why we don't see so many kids die from measles, etc. anymore. Does it infringe upon freedoms? Absolutely. As with anything, it's weighing the risks against the benefits. The risk of being injured, much less dying from a vaccine, is incredibly low. It's a quick, relatively painless procedure with enormous benefits. He talks later on, it's in the cold open, about newer generations being more enlightened.
We are more enlightened than our ancestors because we can look back at their errors and mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? That's the value of knowing history.
Maybe he should listen to his own words, take his own advice. Study viruses. Learn what happens without vaccines. Learn what happens with vaccines. Learn about polio and whooping cough and measles. Learn about the Spanish flu. I mean, for all of his, I'm a free thinker who will never let go of freedom, no matter what, it just makes him sound like a privileged, uneducated social media thinker who has no respect for what his ancestors went through to get us here. And a little aside kind of, but I have to wonder what the death rate would have to be for him to change his mind and go back a little bit on freedom. Like 5%, 10%, 50%? Because if there is a number, well, then he's really no better than the rest of us, right? He just has a higher threshold for death. And if it's nothing, as he's alluded to, right? He's freedom man. He's not going to change. No matter how many people die, he's not going to endorse mandatory vaccines or masking or lockdowns, things that could save lives, because freedom, I don't know. I don't think that's something to be proud of. Sometimes being consistent is the bad thing. Just because you're consistent doesn't mean you're right.
I mean, if you were to go back to January 2020 and you were to even propose some of the notions that people are now advocating for, they themselves would be mortified.
Can you imagine?
Or maybe they just changed their minds. Maybe the reality of a pandemic and living through a pandemic made them see the usefulness of, let's say, mandates, vaccine mandates. I'm going to assume they're talking about mandates here and not something stupid like mask wearing. I'm trying to be charitable. And just to be clear, people have been debating mandatory vaccines long before COVID. It's not like everyone was on the same page until COVID and all of a sudden there's a split. No, lots of people have been advocating for getting rid of religious exemptions for childhood vaccines, effectively making them universal, right? Except for a few people with allergies, few kids with allergies, or with compromised immune systems. It's really totally unsurprising so many people would want to mandate vaccines, given how terrible this disease has been and how effective vaccines have been. They could be talking about lockdowns, but I mean, what is a lockdown? So many people talk about the US like we've been in lockdown, like wearing a mask to the grocery store is lockdown. So I don't know. I'm not even gonna get into that. Slate Star Codex, or now Astral Codex 10, has a really good piece on lockdown effectiveness. Check that out if you're interested.
Over the course of 18, 19 months, whatever it's been now, people have been systematically, and I would argue strategically, propagandized and brainwashed to actually become way more radical and to give up their own freedoms.
Of course, there's got to be some big conspiracy. It just isn't fun without it, right? Like, what's even the point if there isn't a conspiracy? Fauci doesn't care about the American public. He just wants to brainwash us into giving up our freedoms. Yeah, this seems like a real important thinker. Good job, Ellen.
There's nothing radical about saying people should be allowed to make their own basic decisions about whether or not they go outside or who they talk to or whether or not they can hug their friends and family.
Or if they need to wear a mask on the beach.
Open their business, or yes.
During normal times, sure, but it's a pandemic. It's a little bit different. a little bit special. We care about our fellow man, and so we take on, for the most part, minor inconveniences. For the most part, right? I think that is one thing that's really aggravated me about some of the discourse, seeing people say, like, get over it, just wear a mask, as if that's the only thing you have to do is wear a mask. There are grandparents who didn't see their grandchildren for over a year, or still haven't. There are people who basically just lived alone in an apartment without human contact. Now, if you want to argue that none of that was worth it, or played a small role, or only made sense before vaccines were readily available, that's a different, possibly interesting conversation to have. Certainly, if the vaccines had been rolled out much earlier, which they certainly could have been, things could have gone a lot differently. But that's not what Zuby and Ellen and people like them are talking about. That's not what they care about. They're saying that all rules regarding COVID are bad, period, whether they're effective or not. They sound like babies to me. They don't like being told what to do, and they're mad because they're being told what to do. How do you have a conversation with someone like that? What is even the point?
If you want to wear a mask, that's up to you. I've never throughout this whole thing said people should not be allowed to wear masks. If you want to wear a mask, it should be up to you.
Totally.
Well, I'm so glad we've got Dr. Zuby's sage advice.
People hate it when you compare this virus to the flu.
Yeah.
Right? But firstly, they're in the same family. Secondly, the flu is statistically more dangerous to children than this is. That's
Absolutely.
just a fact.
Like
okay?
100% fact.
Yeah. So it would logically make more sense to do all of this and have all of this hysteria when it comes to the younger population over a flu than with this one.
So either he's being intentionally vague in order to make the other side look bad, or he really doesn't know the argument for masking kids, for taking them out of schools, etc. The main reason is not to protect kids, it's to protect the elderly. We have known, or at least highly suspected, from very early on, that this disease was not going to be severe for kids. People were saying early last year to mask up kids, to get them out of schools, to protect teachers, to protect their grandparents. Kids go to school, they inevitably become a carrier, they take that home back to grandma, and she gets sick. That was the point. Now, you can argue this is no longer necessary given vaccines, right? If someone just doesn't want to get vaccinated, or they're still high risk even with a vaccine, that's up to them to take care of themselves. We shouldn't continue to hinder children in order to protect stupid people, or people, the few people, the small percentage of people who really are still in danger. I largely agree with that. At this point, the risk is small for most people who are vaccinated. We do way more dangerous shit day in and day out. But again, this is not what I'm talking about. This is not a nuanced take. This is just, I don't like living through a pandemic, so I'm just going to pretend that it's not a big deal.
Politicians have grasped a lot of power, and I'm someone who's just highly skeptical of the government because I know history and because I see what's going on around the world. And I knew from early on that once they seize that power, it's going to be very difficult for them to relinquish it. They're not going to want to.
What power is he talking about exactly? I wish he would be more specific. Like, what masks? Does he think we're going to wear masks forever? Was that Fauci's plan? That's like the saddest conspiracy of all time.
When you think of all the different incentives from profit to control to power, I mean, I don't believe, someone could disagree with me on this, but at this stage and early on, I don't believe this has anything to do with health or saving lives or taking care of people. I don't believe that. There's so many points that make it clear, especially at this stage, that is not what's going on.
What points? I can't begin to imagine what exactly he's talking about. I mean, has the government handled this perfectly? No, not at all. I've been really depressed, honestly, about how information has been disseminated or hasn't been. How more than once Fauci and others have lied to us for our own good. Like when he lied about herd immunity because he didn't think we were ready to hear the truth. That's bad. And in a just universe, he would have been fired for that. But that doesn't mean he's a bad person. It doesn't mean he's out to get us. It just means he's another stupid human making stupid mistakes whose heart is like largely in the right place. Believing otherwise is wanting to believe otherwise. It's wanting to believe in conspiracy theories. Again, it's baby shit.
I'm open to conversation if people are like, no, this is just about health and about safety. People are entitled to have that viewpoint. But the problem is, see, my view is not infringing on anyone. What I advocate for doesn't infringe on anybody.
Again, baby shit. It's like when my 5-year-old talks about good and evil, talks about bad guys, right? They're the bad guys, period. They go in jail, period. Freedom is good, period. Making people wear a mask is bad, period. It's so easy to do what he's doing, to be dogmatic, to just say freedom and move on. What's hard is actually looking at the consequences, is looking at specific situations and saying, maybe freedom is actually hurting us here. That's where it gets really messy and really complicated, and lots of people make lots of mistakes. But if you really care about what matters, reducing suffering, you cannot be dogmatic. You can't just pick a rule, freedom or whatever it is, and care about that and only that no matter what. You have to care about consequences.
To force everybody else to try to be as afraid of you, as afraid as you, or to try to force everybody else to go along with all this, or literally get to the point where you're trying to force people to inject things into their body because you're scared. I mean, it doesn't even make sense.
He just has no interest in presenting the other side charitably or trying to present them in even an honest light. Instead of forcing people to mask up or to get a shot because we want less people to die, we do that because we're irrationally afraid and want other people to be afraid too. The only reason to present us like that is to make us look crazy. And that, I don't know, man, that doesn't make him look like a free-thinking centrist to me. It makes him look like the opposite, like he's chosen a side and he's going to defend it no matter what. That's tribalism. It makes you not care what the other side is actually saying. It makes you present the dumbest version of their argument in order to make them look weaker and your side look stronger. That is not independent thinking. That's only a third of the way into the video, if you can believe it, so I'm done. People who are this dogmatic, people who do not care about statistics unless it supports their narrative, they are not worth your time. That's not to say there isn't discussion to be had regarding COVID and how it's been handled, but that is way too nuanced of a conversation for these two. And I know I already mentioned Ellen admitting that they don't get into statistics or anything.
And while we don't get into the data and the stats in this episode,
I cannot stress enough how not okay that is in a discussion like this. This is a conversation that hinges on statistics. What is the risk of dying or just being hospitalized or even long COVID? That's what matters. You cannot talk about this without talking about the numbers. We do risky things all the time, presumably because we believe the benefit makes it worth it. During a pandemic, we have to decide whether inconveniencing people to save lives is worth it. At what point is it not? I mean, what if the death rate were half what it is? What if the disease largely affected kids instead of the elderly? What if the death rate was really low but lasting side effects really high? My point is that you cannot talk about a pandemic or really anything, I guess, without talking about the numbers. If you do, all you're left with is dogmatic bullshit, which is all they really care about anyway. They don't care about the numbers. They don't care about the 5+ million who have died. In the grand scheme of things, they don't, because freedom comes first. It's a pretty despicable way to live, honestly. It's hard for me not to be disgusted. If living through this pandemic doesn't make you rethink your freedom stance, if a pandemic doesn't make you go, I know this whole freedom thing is great, but these measures really do look like they would save lives, something is wrong. Which is probably why they almost never stop there, right? Like, I don't want to sound like I think Ellen and Zuby and many of these people are like despicable people. I don't believe that at all. Which is why they can't just stop with, oh yeah, that stuff may be useful actually, but no freedom. Because, ooh, that feels bad, right? For most of us, no matter how dogmatic, that does not feel right. So of course they have to go with, oh no, actually none of that stuff really works. Masking doesn't work. Vaccines don't work. Dangerous, actually. Face diapers. Am I right? I mean, I would have some amount of respect for someone who was like, yep, freedom, not going to mandate anything, but the vaccines, terrific. Please get one. It's just too hard. I mean, obviously, look at the state of libertarianism. So many libertarians have gone just anti-vax or even like full-on COVID skeptic. It's nuts. Like, is it really that hard to go, yeah, freedom, but like this is a pandemic, maybe things are a little bit different? Like wartime? Like, is it really, what? But I'm pro vaccine mandates even when it's not end times, so maybe I'm not the best person to try to understand that mindset. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. Again, I know Ellen has done a few other interviews with people. There is one where she's talking about, I think she's like promoting the vegan side, and then the other person is promoting more of a like pro animal or mixed diet, which is very interesting. Give props to Ellen. A lot of vegan channels would not do that. I wouldn't. I don't want someone like that on my channel. No offense, but like, no. Mildly interested to see what the arguments are there. I'm sure bioavailability, absorption is going to be in there. I would like to see how Ellen is able to answer that. So you guys let me know if you've seen it and if it's worth a video. I don't know. Thank you again. If you liked the video, like it, subscribe, click the bell if you want to be notified when I upload. Thank you so much to supporters, patrons over at patreon.com/unnaturalvegan. I've got shirts and totes and mugs, everything on sale right now over on my spring store. It's been a while since I made a shirt. I'm kind of jonesing, but I don't, like what? I don't have any ideas. I'm not just going to do an unnatural vegan shirt. Ugh. Those are on sale right now. Use the coupon code. I haven't made it yet, so I don't know what the code is. It's on here. Check it out. And I guess that's it for me. Thanks, guys. New video soon.